and welcome to the latest Moviescramble podcast, where we have another thrilling double bill for you. We are looking at two of the biggest box office draws for the summer, and no, we're not even beginning to talk about Marvel or DC. Instead, we've got the need for speed. We're talking about fast zombies and even faster cars. And whilst I am definitely more pit lane than fast lane, joining me today is a gentleman who proves that nice guys don't finish last. It is John. John, how are you?
I'm all right, yeah. I thought you were going to be coming across with some sort of zombie remark there, so it's actually quite pleasant that you avoided that particular one. Although no one would ever describe me as being a skinny a skinny zombie in any way. So, yeah, he knows where the food sources are, I think. So how about yourself? How are you doing?
Really good. Really excited to be talking about these two films, because I feel like we're going to have quite different opinions and experience to bring to both of these. So I'm really looking forward to it. So yeah. Brilliant. So I mean, let's get into the films. First of all, I thought we'd talk about 28 Years Later.
There were so many dead. Infected and non-infected alike.
That's why our home is so precious.
You know, I feel he's a bit young.
He's ready, Jenny.
7, 6, 11, 5.
Once you walk onto that mainland, there's no rescues.
Moving up and down again. Don't. Look at what's in front of you.
That puts Danny Boyle and Alex Garland back in control of the 28 franchise, as it's now known, because this is the first of a new trilogy. The film opens in the Highlands of Scotland before quickly taking us to an island just off the mainland UK. This film disregards the notion of a spread suggested at the end of 28 weeks later, as the title cards note that it is only the UK that finds itself in quarantine. We are introduced to Spike, played by Alfie Williams, and his parents, Jamie and Isla, played by Aaron Taylor-Johnson and Jodie Comer, who are eking out an existence while still mindful of the threat of the infected. So, Danny Boyle obviously returns to direct. How do you feel his vision has evolved from 28 days later to 28 years later?
Interesting that you miss out the middle one there, because it wasn't really...
Well, he wasn't really involved.
He wasn't really involved in it, yes. Yeah. I think it has evolved in a very interesting way, because it's not taking the obvious route, and it's changed things, and it's matured, and it's become something slightly different, because in order for them to have a film that is set 28 years later, you still have to have the infected. Now, we were told with 28 weeks later that they were all dying out, which was fair enough. Yep, kind of understand. But the way that they actually changed that so that you still have infected now is very, very interesting. It makes perfect sense as well, because it's set in the countryside. It's not set in a big city. And in the countryside, there are animals. Under normal circumstances, animal populations are managed by people, by farmers. They cull, they make sure that certain breeds do not actually get out of control, because, like, you know, you're even talking about things like deer hunting and grouse shooting and all this sort of stuff, because that keeps the population contained. Whereas here it doesn't, so therefore there's plenty of stuff for the infected to actually eat, which I thought interesting. That's really good, because that gets that out of the way, because you think, well, how long can they last? And you got to remember, they're not zombies, these are infected, so therefore they're not dead, which leads on to, I mean, there's other stuff we'll talk about, obviously, about them not being dead as well. But yes, I thought it was particularly well done, the fact that they moved into that, and they were able to sort of set up 28 years later in that way, and you had a clear idea of why they were still around. And obviously it was less clear why it was just the UK. Apparently he said that one of the things he said, well, as soon as it hit Paris, he would just nuke Paris in order to stop it, or firebomb it just basically raise it so nothing that's in that area would get out. So, and that would be a decision that would have taken right away. They wouldn't have waited until, tried to put up barriers in, because that wouldn't work. You just get rid of it all. And that means the European mainland is safe, and it is just Britain, and it is that way. Now, why they actually need boats and stuff to patrol, I don't actually know, because, or maybe they thought they would they would be able to, dinghy technology or something. I don't know. But, yeah.
But you do get that, and I actually quite like the fact that it brings it back to the UK, because I feel like this is a very British film franchise or film experience. So I quite like the fact that it was just contained back to the UK. It did make me wonder if infected deer or infected rabbits or whatever were going to become a thing, because obviously that's what they're feeding off of, but obviously it doesn't quite go down that route. But I like the fact that it sort of brings it all back to the UK as well, because I felt like, had it become a sort of global thing, as 28 weeks later suggests, it might perhaps lose some of its, I don't know what you would call it, like the sort of personal story, because then it just becomes a massive big thing. Whereas when you've got that sort of containment of the small island, I feel like it allows for story to develop a bit more. And I think that's definitely something that Alex Garland's script has striven to do. So there's like continuity within the sort of franchise lore, if you want to call it that, but also introducing these new elements. So like we've got this new community that's been set up just off the mainland of the UK. What did you think of the writing and the story?
I thought it was very good. It pulled you in really quickly, and without like lots of exposition or even like a scroll across the screen saying, well, this is how things have developed over 20 years. That it just said these people are on an island which is linked to the mainland by a causeway, a tidal causeway, which keeps them safe to a certain extent, because you don't know if the infected can actually swim or not.
Yeah.
So that's something as well, which was never really touched on in the film, but well, that's probably why, even though they had the causeway, they had like a full set of defences, and people always watched it, because there was always that threat. It was never 100%. Although at one point in the film, there was a camp that was set up where the doctor was, and he was protected by water to a certain extent, but not to the same extent. So yes, so there may have been something like that. They just couldn't quite get it. But everything was set up really, really quickly, and it was all visual about how they lived, how they managed, how the community worked, and the fact that there was a threat, even though you didn't see anything to begin with. I thought it was a wee bit disconcerting at the start, because you had the whole thing, like you said in the intro there, set in the Highlands, and then it cut away from that, and you were like, well, what does that actually, what does that mean? Because there was nothing, it didn't say anything, and then it just comes up with a 28 years later card, and you say, was that from the 28 years later, or was that 28 years before? To get, and obviously that you do get told about that later on, but surprisingly not till the very end.
Yes, which I'm sure we can chat about. Well, obviously, this, just to sort of state that off, then, if you haven't seen this film, we probably are going to get into spoilers the more we talk about it. So pause now if you haven't seen it, and obviously come back and join us once you have. I think in terms of me, the writing, I think at times was a bit laboured. I do have issues with the sort of patriarchal structures that these films tend to perpetrate, and I feel like that continued in this film as well. So maybe that's why I didn't connect with this as much. I mean, I had, again, high hopes, and I just didn't really enjoy it. But I think for me, the writing at times did lend itself to quite a big disconnect between what was maybe meant to be sort of poignant moments and moments that actually irritated me instead. But again, we can get into that a wee bit later. So obviously I've said that Jodie Comer and Aaron Taylor-Johnson are sort of leading the cast for this. How would you rate their performances as Jamie and Isla?
I would say they were both good, but there's a bit of a caveat in there that Jodie Comer didn't have an awful lot to do in this film. She was like lying about in her bed for most of it, because obviously what you haven't said is she was ill. An unknown ailment. It was obviously something, initially it looked as if it was some sort of mental condition that she had, something that was affecting her ability to actually like do stuff, and she'd have good days and bad days. So that's what you're kind of led to think, or what I was led to think in the beginning. which
Yes, I
obviously
would
did
agree with
slightly
that, yeah.
change as we're going on. But there wasn't very much of it. She was more of the one, oh no, you can't do that, don't do this, don't go into the mainland, he's too young, and all this sort of stuff. The Aaron Taylor-Johnson character was more sort of exposition-y more than anything else. He was there to push the story forward in order for the son to then actually carry on, and he would have the whole story. But you needed that background to see where he came from, how he was actually brought up and all that. So obviously he was a fully formed character. Aaron Taylor-Johnson was fully formed at that point. He was a man, he had his wife who was not well, but he was also a bit of a dick as well, you know, and there was a whole sort of drinking culture around the whole place as well, which seemed a wee bit strange, but you know, fair enough. Yeah, if you're surrounded by infected, you may want to have a drink.
Maybe I was going to say maybe a strong drink is the only way to get through it.
Yeah, so I thought they were good. Yeah, but you know.
Yeah, I struggle with the Aaron Taylor-Johnson character in particular because I would say that he's not given that much to do, but he is sort of like he is perpetuating these, as I've said, these sort of patriarchal structures. So he wants his son to be a hunter and to, you know, be the youngest boy to ever go on the mainland. And he's telling basically tall tales about what Spike was able to achieve when they were on the mainland, because his machismo, I suppose, takes over, and he wants to have this feeling of, you know, my son is so good at this because I'm so good at this. And also he kind of sees his wife as a bit of an inconvenience. I feel like she's obviously very, very unwell, but you don't ever get the sense that he is going out of his way to support her sort of emotionally or physically or whatever. And indeed, obviously, he's going for a little bit of a fumble up a lane at some point during the film as well. So I didn't like his character at all. Like, if he was supposed to be the sort of, and he kind of, well, not supposed to be, he does kind of drive the first part of the story with Spike, but actually he was not a character that I liked at all. And again, and I'm really sorry, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, because I'm sure you listen to this podcast religiously, but he was the weakest thing in this for me. And I said that about Nosferatu as well. And I'm struggling with the concept of him as James Bond because I just don't think he really brought anything to this film.
I think the character itself didn't lend to having a top-notch performance in this, because like, the character himself, like you say, he doesn't relate to his wife very well, and I think that's because he doesn't have the tools in his box in order to do that. He is a very sort of, it's almost like a throwback male character.
I get what you're saying, like a sort of 50s, 60s kind of.
Yeah, when men were men, hunter-gatherers and all this, you know, that kind of thing, yeah. So he doesn't know, or he's unwilling to learn how to do that, because obviously there's a capacity for change within everybody. But I don't think in that community it's encouraged. I think it's encouraged that they have these hunters and warriors and stuff, and they have people who have particular skills doing other things. Now, yeah, they are very much down gender lines there as well.
Yeah, because you see that in the school where they show the posters. It's like, here's the hunter and it's a male, and here's like the baker and the sewer and they're female. And when the men come back from the hunting and gathering, it's the women who are putting out the buffet and hanging up the balloons and stuff like that. So it is a very rigid society,
Yeah, even though the leader of the community is female, you could tell there's elders in the community. I think it was like 5 of them, and she was the one that did all the speaking. But even then, that wasn't really sort of developed in any way, or even didn't spend any length of time on it, because she would say something and then they would go and do it anyway. They would nip out, you know, and escape or whatever, things like that. So yes, I think it was a bit of a throwback, and I don't think it did Aaron Taylor-Johnson any favours in that regard. I actually think he is a pretty decent actor, but the roles that you mentioned, obviously, this is a sort of secondary role, and Nosferatu was a secondary role. Whereas when we were talking earlier, and obviously I mentioned Bullet Train, that was a secondary role, but he was allowed to do a bit more in that because it was more comedic and it was more involved for him. Whereas these roles, it's a particular type he's playing in them, and it doesn't get the chance to expand it. And I think that's got a lot of that's got to do with the writing, because he is a good actor. And there's no way I'm going to defend Craven the Hunter here, but you know,
I was going to say, where is this going? But do you know what, though? That is a fair point about the writing, because I think that's where I struggled with the Jodie Comer character as well, because she's just not fleshed out properly enough as well, because Jodie Comer is excellent. Like, I think she's a really strong actress, but actually here she was sort of, underused in a way that feels kind of criminal for somebody of her abilities. And maybe that's the same with Aaron Taylor-Johnson as well, and I'm just being unfair, but for me, given that was such a major part of the narrative on the island in particular, that this is where I kind of struggled. The disconnect with this film sort of started for me was through those characters. But we do obviously have Alfie Williams making his feature debut here as Spike. What did you think of his performance?
He was excellent. He was able to convey a real struggle within him, because obviously he wanted to be one thing for his father. He wanted to be like his father, but he was basically too young to actually emotionally take on the responsibility of, one, killing an animal and then killing an infected as well, because that was the whole thing. It was, they go hunting, but there's an initiation to happen, and the first thing that you have to do is you have to kill one of the infected, one of the slow lumbering infected.
That would be me. The infected full of butter. That would be me.
Yeah, which again, that feeds into the fact that the infected are still around and they're all pretty well fed at these points. You've got different ones, and I think it's down to an age thing more than anything else, because all the skinny ones that don't really move about very well and are quite slow, they're older, whereas the younger ones move fast. The ones that you see in that initial scene where he's got to kill one, they're all fat, they're all bloated, because they've all been eating and not doing anything else.
Into oblivion. Like, it's quite interesting, and we'll go on to the sort of different types of infected as well. But I did think that was, for Spike in particular, quite a big character moment, is that he looks upon this like bloated infected and he almost kind of feels sorry for it. He's like, he doesn't really want to put an arrow in it, but his dad is there at the background, like telling him what to do, and it's his dad that puts that sense of urgency in his head, whereas he clearly doesn't feel that way.
Oh, definitely, yes. He would have been quite happy just going back, I think, and just saying, no, didn't manage to do anything, do it in another couple of years or whatever, But it's his father's pushing him, saying, like, oh, we found one, right? This is what you do, use your training and all this. But anybody knows that doing something in a training scenario and doing it in a live scenario is entirely different. The pressures that are on you, and that's it for anything. So, and when you are actually taking a life, yes, these people are infected. They would turn on you and they would kill you. They would eat you or turn you to infected without a second thought. But there's still a certain amount of humanity in there as well, and he really struggles with that. He really does, and he struggles with it all through the film, because he's just a wee boy. I mean, let's face it, he's 12. Yeah. So if it would have been disingenuous if halfway through the film he became some sort of super warrior or very confident doing what he's doing, because it's not the type of person he is, and it's not the character. And that was quite thoughtful, I thought, and the kid playing him was brilliant. He got that across time and time again about the fact that he was scared and he was humiliated in a way because he wasn't living up to the image from his father. But at the same time, he kind of knew what he should have been doing, because he was always looking after his mum. Like, he would take her up take her up a bit of bacon for her breakfast when bacon's in really short supply, and he sort of put it into a wee napkin and took it up to her, because he's looking after her, he's trying to care for her, because he knows that there's something wrong with her and he can't help her, so he's trying to be a son, basically a proper son to her, and not be this sort of macho idiot that just sort of ignores what's going on because they can't understand and they can't deal with it, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I thought, with 28 weeks later, we all said that we found the kids fairly intolerable as leads in that film. So I was going into this thinking, fuck, please don't, please have learned from the last time. And actually, I feel like they have. Don't get me wrong, like, I would much rather this film was led by adults, because I'm just not really a fan of child actors in general. But I do think he does a very good job of, as you say, displaying this sort of array of emotions. More so, like, I definitely think he's given more to do emotionally than his parents. Like, I feel like the parent characters are very, very two-dimensional. Whereas I feel like we do see Spike sort of going through the ringer, as it were, during this film. And then obviously we've got Ralph Fiennes as well, who brings this sort of gravitas to the film. You know, he is the sort of quirky doctor living out in the hills, building his memento moris. What did you think of his appearance in the film?
As soon as I saw the images of Ralph Fiennes, I immediately thought of Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now.
Oh, no way.
Because of the bald head and the iodine covered body, you know, and you would see him at night and all this sort of stuff, and the way that he came across as being this sort of quirky character. Now, it was interesting the way that you were introduced to him, because you were introduced to him as being some sort of boogeyman. Because it was a story that was told about him rather than actually meeting him. You didn't actually see him.
You just saw the fire in the hill, and that was you knew that's where he was.
And it was just from the father's story, and they said, you know, we went towards the fire and we looked down and we saw these bodies lined up, and he was standing there waving, hello, you know, that kind of thing. But it wasn't even as exaggerated. It was just a wave of recognition that he'd seen other sort of human beings. But because of this imagery, there was a certain anticipation as to what the character was like. And they completely dispelled that when he was introduced, because he was soft-spoken. He was quite gentle. He knew what he was doing. He was very, very clever. You could tell he was very clever in the things that he did and the ways that he talked. He talked to the mother in a different way than he talked to the son. And that's what a doctor does. He talks to whoever the audience is and gauges how best to communicate with them. He used different language to talk to the mother and the son. He didn't need to say as much to her because there was a certain unspoken understanding.
Yes.
Whereas the son, he would actually have to explain things to him a little bit more. And I thought that was excellent. It was showing that even after 28 years in the wilderness and doing what he was doing with these bone piles, he still had humanity about him. And that's not what the character initially was. The character was this mad, crazy guy out in the woods just burning bodies. Yeah. Yeah,
I worried he was going to be a bit of a cliche from that story that obviously Jamie tells, and just from the shots that we'd seen. But he is my favourite part of this film. I feel like he is the most human character. It's a great performance from Ralph Fiennes. As you say, there's a gentleness to him and an awareness of who he's speaking to at all times. And I thought he was really fascinating. Now, I don't know if he's going to be in future installments of this franchise, but I would have loved to have seen more of him, both like in this film in terms of like backstory and all that sort of thing, and just a little bit more of him fleshed out. But for me, he is by far and away the strongest, most interesting part of this film, because I think that there's, as I say, he could have fallen into cliche, and it's perhaps his performance that makes it not so. Like he's very, and even just the notion that he is building these statues and he's so careful. There's almost like a sort of like religious ceremony involved in sort of purifying the bones and giving them their right place within the memento moris that he's building. And I just thought like he was so fascinating to me, but also someone who's not afraid to do what needs to be done as well in order to survive. Like you don't live that long by yourself in the middle of all these infected, you know, for being gentle. So there's obviously this notion that he is a survivor as well, which I really liked, but again, perhaps wasn't explored as much as it could have been.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, the whole thing about building these monuments to the dead, something obviously broke in him as when the infection actually kicked off. Something snapped in him, because that's not normal human behavior. And he was able to channel that into a purpose, a way to live, rather than being this complete mad character. He obviously, there's a certain amount of madness swirling about him at all times, because it's not normal what he's doing. But he has set out his whole sort of purpose, like you say, like present like a monument to the people who were there, so that they're not forgotten. They are remembered in these very impressive sort of statues, and I mean, it is artistic the way that it has been done as well, which, you know, the way it was all laid down and everything. I thought, it is years, and it looks as if it's years and years of work. It's not something that you could just do in a couple of years. This is nearly 30 years of your life spent doing this. And the fact that he was able to live there while the infected were all around him as well just showed that, yes, maybe he has snapped, but he's still very present. He knows what's going on, and he's obviously tried different things in order to protect himself, like developed serums and things in order to like knock people out and all this kind of thing, and also protect himself by covering himself in iodine as well.
Yep.
So, you know, I thought it was, you're right, it was the highlight performance from the whole film. And I would definitely like to see his character again. I don't know if I want to see anything to do with a backstory, because...
Yeah, that's fair.
You know, would that take away from what he has actually become and what he's bringing to the screen just now? Perhaps it would, but, you know, do you want to see this guy as a normal guy?
I know, probably not. Actually, I don't think Ray Fiennes a normal guy. Like, I feel like he's quite quirky and eccentric as well. Like, I was watching the press tour for this, and they were talking about like Rudyard Kipling's Boots, and they asked Jodie Comer and Ray Fiennes, like, "Oh, what's your favourite poem?" And she was like, "I don't know any poems," and he just launched into a Shakespearean sonnet whilst making very intense eye contact with the interviewer. And the interviewer afterwards is also quite a bit breathless, because I don't think anyone's ever, recited Shakespeare in that way to him. But I feel like he is that type of guy who is like almost comes across like vaguely sort of reclusive, but has all this knowledge and actually is quite a perfect fit for that character.
Well, look what he's done over the last year. He's been a cardinal, he's been Homer, and now he's been a sort of mad Colonel Kurtz.
Yeah.
Crazy doctor character.
He's having a good time.
He's enjoying himself, yes. And, his filmography over the last couple of years has been so varied. I mean, obviously he's involved in Bond and everything as well. So he's been doing all sorts of stuff, big and small. And I think he's just having a great time of it. I think he enjoys doing these smaller roles that involve more preparation, and it gives him a bit of leeway to try different things and all that as well. And he's always done bits and pieces of that throughout his career. He's moved away from like the whole English patient thing. He moved away from that reasonably quickly, because he could have been sort of typecast into that sort of stuff. But
absolutely,
again, even right back to the sort of start of his career, where he was Lenny in Strange Days, doing the American accent and the long hair and all this, so yeah, because at the same time, he was
interesting guy, isn't he? Yeah.
Definitely, yes. Yep.
So the film is described as coming of age horror. Do you agree? Do you agree with that? And have you heard of that genre before? Because I certainly didn't.
No, I haven't heard of it. I can understand why, obviously, because the central character is a 12-year-old boy in it who is very impressionable, and he's looking for role models. That's why he looks after his mum, and he wants his mum to get better, because he sees her as being a stable role model, one who asks questions before making decisions, because she was saying, no, he's too young, he can't go out on this. And that all came true, basically, because the boy was shit scared after it, and they only just made it back. So, but whereas the father is just, no, he's going to be a man, he's going to do this. So he's looking for a role model that's somewhere in between, that has both of those. And I think his mother is closer to that. So, coming of age, I can understand why they say it. I've never heard of that before.
Me neither. And I did think it was just an interesting concept, because I keep seeing, it's funny, I keep seeing memes, and it's like, millennials who have survived terror attacks, economy failing twice, blah, blah, blah. So it's almost like coming of age horror has become a thing sort of after the fact. It's like you've lived through all of this, what you would call generational trauma, I guess. And that's certainly what Spike is living through here, whilst, as you say, having all the pressures of trying to prove who he is as a man within this society that has been established. So I thought it was really interesting just to hear it described as that, and I would be keen to see if there were any other films that sort of fitted that genre, I guess. I'm sure there are others out there, so if you can think of one obviously let us know. And there are obviously quite big horror set pieces or sequences. Was there any that sort of stood out to you as particularly effective or disturbing, or, you know, what was your sort of, did you feel frightened watching this film, I guess?
Yes, I did, because in the initial sequences, where not the one set in the Highlands, that was more.
Although the Teletubbies did scare the shit out of me.
Yeah, that was more in line with the sort of the start of 28 Weeks Later. That was that kind of introduction with the infected coming in and basically killing a community of people. It was similar in that way. So that was fairly standard, but it was when the father and son were trapped on the mainland, and they're in the forest, so it's like, you know, big trees and everything, and when they actually hide out in the house, and when you see the infected actually just waiting for them to come out, I found that really scary, because that's like, whoa, this is different, this is another dimension, this isn't just they heard you, they saw you and you're running at you. This is something entirely different. I know you said we'll probably talk about that in a minute, but it was that, and the fact that they'd introduced the fact that there was lots of deer about, so they made loads of noise, you could hear all that, but then they mixed that in with the infected all running about as well, and it was just, this is something a wee bit different. This is scary. And it was just building it up until actually kicked off, and then they had to try and escape. And it's the whole thing with, they're using bows and arrows here, and there's a limit. Yeah, there's a limit to the number of arrows you can have, or the number of arrows you can actually carry. So it's like having a gun with only 6 bullets, whereas you're faced with a horde. How do you get away from that? What do you do? And everything. I found that whole sequence there was particularly effective, and it was scary. There were others, obviously, but the initial one, that kind of set up the rest of the film for me in terms of what to expect. And what to expect was, don't expect this again, expect something else. So what about you?
Yeah, I particularly liked, do you know when it was almost like this sort of night vision, and you just saw the eyes peeking out, because it looks like obviously animals at night time, and then you realise it's infected that have sort of burrowed. So there was a couple of glimpses of that before Spike and Jamie actually come to the mainland, and you weren't ever really sure what that was until, as you say, there's that nighttime scene where they're sort of hiding out, and you're aware that the infected are circling the building. So I thought that was really effective, and I also just like the chase sequence between the Alpha, Jamie and Spike, as they were trying to make their way back to their community, and the tides moving in. And again, it's this notion of, we're not familiar with this particular kind of infected, in particular the Alpha, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this notion of, didn't know if they could swim, didn't know if they could, how fast they would be. And so there definitely was, like, that was quite, the old heart was ticking then, because you were thinking, shit, are we going to see the death of a child in this film? Or, how big and strong is this Alpha? So I thought that definitely added a sense of urgency and danger to the film as well, because, and I think this is one of the main talking points of this film, the infected have definitely evolved within this installment. They are still terrifying, but there's also this notion that they are clever. So we get this community built around the Alpha, who obviously is big and strong and make all the Henry Hoover jokes you want, as they're already circulating on TikTok. But there's this notion that they now sort of hunt in packs and that they're clever. But then on the flip side of that, you've got the sort of older ones that pop up, but they're not Cillian Murphy. And then you've got the kind of sloth-like ones that have just gorged themselves. Like, what did you think of all these different kinds of infected? Because it's now just not people running down a street with, blood spatter all over them. There's like, they've set up communities within themselves. How did that add to your sort of viewing experience?
I was really surprised at it, to be perfectly honest, because I didn't expect it at all. I thought they would still be infected, but I was probably thinking along the terms of, they would just be the same. But that the way that they've tackled it is that the infected are still alive, so therefore they still have certain human traits about them. So therefore they act as if they're humans. Given enough time, they would act as if they're humans, and part of that is living in a society, working with others, using whatever facilities around, and looking to leaders, having people who lead you and all that. So that's all you see that obviously throughout history, and obviously now we're set up in a society that has leaders. We work communally in order for whatever reasons, So yes, that made perfect sense. And the fact that you would see some of them, there was a scene they were all in a river, and they were like washing and cleaning and stuff like that. And I was like, why would that happen? And you think, well, that's sort of ingrained into you, that you clean yourself, you keep yourself clean in order to sort of stave off infection and everything. That means they're all infected, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It elongates life if you maintain a certain health about you, even though, like I say, so yeah, it was all very strange. And the fact that the biggest and the strongest become the alphas, even call them alphas, because they're in charge and they're massive. Now, is that a genetic thing that's happened because people have been infected, but they're still procreating? So therefore their offspring, which are infected, become stronger because of something that's actually within the virus? That was obviously that can't be explained, because you're not going to cut away to a group of scientists sitting somewhere in a lab.
No. Working it all out,
yeah, on the top of a mountain, and they've got these subjects. They've actually evolved over 28 years. No, that would take you completely out of the story here. That would be nonsense. So you don't have that. So you're making up your own mind about it. You're coming up with assumptions, saying, well, you're talking about nearly 30 years later. So yes, the ones that survive would probably start to organise. It's a different evolution, if you like, and sort of next step for humans. They always talk about that, the next sort of what's going to be the next stage for human beings, and when they actually develop. And that usually happens over millennia. It doesn't happen over like decades, but this is increased because of the fact that they are infected. So I was very interested to see that, because the ones that, there was like family groups as well. We podgy family groups that, like you say, they gorged themselves, and the skin was pale blue. They could obviously come from the west of Scotland. But yes,
overweight and very pale. It's like, oh, these are the Glasgow infected.
Yeah, they're the ones that are staying in the trees. They're not going outside into the sun. But yeah, so what did you think?
Yeah, it's for me. This is, as I say, I didn't really like this film, but the presentation of the infected was fascinating to me, because, as you say, it's like it's only been a few decades, but already you can see these social groups have started to form, and there's ones that are bigger and stronger, which in itself is terrifying. But the notion that, as you say, they were living together, working together, cleaning together, making babies together, forming societies, it's like, do they eventually become the humans? Like, because to me, this is the most human the infected have felt, because yes, they're snarling and they're biting and they're covered in blood and all the rest of it, but there was definitely a social aspect to them, and a sort of collective that we haven't ever seen before. Like, they were definitely working in packs, and in the same way that obviously Jamie and Spike's weapons were primitive, it felt like watching sort of like primitive man sort of working in small groups, hunting, all that sort of thing. So for me, I find that really disturbing, in the sense that, as I say, it wasn't this sort of mindless, like, gurning, zombie in inverted commas, like these, where there was clear elements of humanity and a collectiveness there, which is mirrored in, the society that Jamie and Isla and Spike live in, because it's primitive in terms of its gender roles, and it's primitive in terms of the way they hunt and eat, and obviously they work collectively together. So really, I guess it's sort of, I'm not saying the film's asking you who's the more human here, because it's certainly not, but it does make you think about the way that the infected are sort of treated and looked at, when actually they're evolving to become still scary and still fast and would still rip your head off if given a chance, but they're definitely showing more sort of human traits. And I guess, like, the film, I feel, definitely is violent. Like, there definitely is like scenes of violence and things like that, but in a way it almost feels like sort of necessary. And again, it comes back to this notion of, well, the infected are just eating and hunting deer the way that the people on the island are, so does that make them bad? Like, I'm not saying it's asking you to sort of make these comparisons, but I feel like the violence in particular is indistinguishable from one tribe, if you want to call it, to another. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all, like you say, it's tribal behaviour. And if you took away the element of them being infected, it would just be warring tribes, one trying to take over, one trying to wipe out the other one. And I think this may be something that will be developed in the next two films, one, maybe two films. I think there'll be elements of that. They'll develop that because that has been, the seed for that has been planted with the audience saying, these are not the infected that you have seen previously. This is not the people from, you know, a month and a half later and half a year later. It's not the same because both of those films were set in cities, and there is a lack of food other than humans in a city. So therefore they're going to die out. It's going to naturally die out. So this is something different entirely. And this is what happens given enough time. I think it works in terms of it being sort of 30 years because there are certain things that are ingrained within sort of human DNA and evolution that would allow for these societies to build up in the space of decades rather than hundreds of years, because we've had all this history about us. And what I think what they're trying to say is the infected don't forget that sort of thing. They can't really vocalize it, although there are some who obviously can speak as well. Yeah, just a couple of them, not very many, but which reminded me a wee bit of the sort of whole Planet of the Apes thing as well, how the humans couldn't speak anymore and that. And then, you know, there's obviously parallels with that film in terms of it's a virus that in that case goes worldwide and affects all the humans and everything. So yes, I think it's interesting, and I think, at least I hope it will be developed further, because what you don't want to see happening is just sort of standard horror films coming after this, now that they've opened the gates to try and explore these things. And it's the same writer as well, so you would think that it won't just be a sort of standard sort of fare, if you like. But anything's possible, I suppose.
That's true. Also, I think watching this film in particular, sort of post-pandemic as well, I think is quite interesting, because obviously, as I say, I only watched the first one during the pandemic, which probably wasn't the smartest idea I've ever had. But I think it's really interesting in the sense that it sort of locks the UK down again, because obviously at the start of the film it explains that it's the UK on its own, and there's obviously been like a sort of societal collapse, and there's a rebuilding effort going on within the island. And in a way, I guess it kind of does reflect how we all behaved sort of pandemic. You know, there were people fighting for bread and pasta and toilet paper and leaving others with nothing, and it did become this sort of like squabbling, you know, mess, and you saw people's true colours, whether that was good or bad. Do you think there's any of that in the film, or am I just reading too much into this?
I don't think you are, because those were real lived experiences, and I think this film has taken it, because up until the sort of pandemic, the only exposure we had to these sort of things was through films, and it's how writers interpreted what would actually happen. Now, when you see real life examples of people going nuts because they don't have enough toilet paper and they've got like 25 rolls sitting in the house already, and you know they're fighting for stuff in supermarkets, and there is a certain amount of craziness that goes on out there with these, you know, panics, and people revert back to states where it is almost primal. It's, you know, looking after yourself, looking after your own people, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it did inform it. It obviously didn't need to hit the nail completely on the head with it, but just use elements of it, and enough so people could say, I saw that in the television 5 years ago. That's the kind of thing that was going on. There was empty shelves and there was people panicking, and people were against each other and all this for whatever reason. And there's elements of that obviously in the real world at the moment. Like you mentioned when we were talking earlier, it all depends on the colour of your skin, how Europeans react or are told to react to certain situations through the news and everything like that. So yes, it's subtle the way that it's done, and I wouldn't expect it any other way really with Alex Garland, because he tends to use these elements and bring them together, but not totally hammer you with it. He likes to be a little more subtle. And I think he really wants people to think about things more than anything else.
For me, some of it was a wee bit on the nose. Like, for example, when they saw the Shell garage and the S was missing, I was like, come on, guys.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah. Aye.
That was a wee bit sort of on the nose. But I do think that it's interesting that this film has come out now, as I say, a sort of post-pandemic reality, if you want to call it that, because I do think it, no matter whether it's subtle or not, I think it can't help but inform these types of films now that we have lived through those particular types of situations. And as I say, you sort of see the best and worst in people. So Young Fathers composed the score. How does their sound sort of shape the film compared to John Murphy's obviously quite iconic piece of music, which was used in 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later? What did you think in terms of the sort of the music, the score, or indeed the silence throughout the film?
It was more back to 28 Days Later than 28 Weeks Later. There was not a lack of score, but it was done far more subtly, and it was used to really good effect. Like you say, silence played a major part in this, because of course there would be silence. There's no industry, there's no cars, you know, people are not driving, so you don't have that. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing like that at all. So a lot of the music and the soundtrack and the sort of soundscape was all mixed in together very sort of gently and anything. And then you would get, obviously, during action scenes or like, you know, like a jump scare or whatever, you would get wee sort of stabs that, but it was very much in the background. It was very much, this is an element of this film, but don't pay attention to this because big scary alphas over here, look at these, you know, that kind of thing. So it worked very well, and I was glad that they didn't use like the refrains from the, you know, in a heartbeat or anything like that. Again, I thought, because that would have just been, you just
overkill.
You don't want to do that again. It's not very subtle at all, and it's not what the film should be about. It shouldn't be harking back to something else you've seen, because it can be regarded as a standalone film. There's nothing here that actually links it back to like you say, the kids from 28 Weeks Later are not in this film. There's no mention of anybody. It's deliberately set in two locations that have not been mentioned at all. You're talking about the Northeast and the Highlands at the very start of it. So there's obviously like a whole country in between, because the previous two were very London-centric, what happens in the big city and all that. And you could tell that was done for the dramatic impact on it, something, a disease hitting a city and what's the impact here. But now this is the aftermath. So it could have been called anything, this film. It really could have. It didn't necessarily need to be called 28 Years Later, but there's obviously a link with the infected themselves, and obviously the not Killian infected guy.
I know. I did have a wee chuckle when that infected popped up, because I just thought, I mean, it's in a way it's a compliment, because that infected does have excellent cheekbones, so it's just testament to Cillian Murphy's good bone structure. But in a way, you're also like, if that was Cillian Murphy, I'd probably be quite annoyed if people thought that was me. But no, I'm glad they steered away from the John Murphy score as well. I like the fact that they actually did take the boots that they use in the trailer and put that in the film, because that is, to me, that makes me sort of blink like a broken doll. It's very sort of unsettling, that particular rendition of that poem. So I'm glad that they brought that in as well. But yeah, I think silence is quite a pivotal part in this, because it's semi-rural. So, you know, there would just be, as you've said, like deer sort of wandering around or whatever, and then occasionally you get like the slither of a bloated corpse dragging itself across some woodland. But I appreciated the fact that they did stay away from that piece of music, because obviously, as we discussed on our earlier pod, by the time you get around to 28 Weeks Later, it is complete overkill with that particular piece of music. So I'm glad that they did sort of move away from that. Now, obviously, we've spoken about how the film does start in the Scottish Highlands. The film is bookended by two very, very unusual scenes, and in particular, its ending, which I've actually had to explain to people from outside the UK who don't know what that ending necessarily means or represents. So again, major spoilers here, so if we're going to get talking about it. What did you think of the ending, and what did you think it suggests for either the future of the film franchise or just Spike's future in general that we might not necessarily see in future films?
What it suggests is that there are organised groups that are living in parts of communities, but at the same time, you would get these sort of wee vigilante, almost like terrorist cells that are going to be going about, and their one purpose is just to try and wipe out as many infected as they possibly can. I really like the fact that it's Jimmy, isn't it? His name is? Yes. So 28 years previously, he would be watching cartoons, children's television, and the likes of Jimmy Savile at the time would still be a personality that was regarded as, oh, fair enough, yeah, very quirky and everything, but that appeals to children, quirky characters. A cartoon character would in the same way, but he wasn't disgraced. He wasn't regarded as being a disgrace in the way he is now, because that all cut off at that point. So therefore, that's somebody that he would look up to, and therefore that's why Jimmy and all the other Jimmys wear the tracksuits, wear the big gold chains, and the way they act, and they've all got like sort of various mullets and stuff like that, and sort of like blonde hair and all sorts of things like that. So that's why. At first I thought, oh, why are they doing that? And then I thought it makes perfect sense, because the world, as far as the UK concerned,
stopped at a certain time.
Yes. There's no context for anything else happening. And this, I think this character, the Jimmy character that bookends it, he's going to be pivotal in everything that happens. And I don't see him as being a protagonist. I see him very much as an antagonist going forward, because there's something about unhinged about him.
Yeah.
And it's very, but I also felt it was very strange as well, because up until that point, like we've talked about, it's bows and arrows and blow darts and things like that they were using. These folk come along and it's all kung fu moves and everything. It's all martial arts and everything. And it's just going, what the hell is going on? And they're all doing like tumbles and all this. It's just all over the place. It's just totally unexpected. And I had a good laugh when I was watching it because of that. And I thought, what the hell are they going to do now? How do they take this forward? Yeah.
Sammy and I both, I think we must have been in like the same screening but different cinemas, and we both came out and texted each other at the same time, basically saying, Jimmy Savile ninjas, what the fuck? And so for me, like, again, this roots this film franchise, or this film generally, within a sort of sense of Britishness as well, because again, like, definitely. There's going to be lots of people out there who just do not know who Jimmy Savile is. But for me, I was confused because I was laughing at it and I was like, why am I laughing at this? Like, this is not funny. Like, everyone knows who he is and what he's done. But as you say, it sets up this darkness because he might look to Spike right now like someone who is protecting him. But actually, there's like obviously this sort of like cult around him of people who dress the same and look the same and can do kung fu. And that, to me, sets up a real sense of danger. And obviously, as people from the UK, we know who Jimmy Savile is and what he's done. So for me, that felt out of place in the sense that it felt far too comedic. But it does have, obviously, this nasty sort of layer of grime over it. Because, as I say, we know who Jimmy Savile is. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that character is involved in any potential sequels, if they're involved at all. Or if it was just too weird bookends to the film that Danny Boyle thought he would just fuck with us with, because obviously you get the Teletubbies at the start and Jimmy Savile at the end. I don't know, but it kind of took me out of the film, I guess, as well, because I found it, as I say, I found the ninja stuff funny, but also I just found it deeply uncomfortable because obviously we know who Savile is and what he's done. So I don't know, I felt like it really took me out of the film, actually, and it just ends, like, just completely, like, cuts to credits fairly quickly. So I'm not sure how I feel about that as an ending, but I understand, as you've said, why it's been done, because there is a timeline that exists where Jimmy Savile was still seen as a good guy, charitable works, married, scenes, all the rest of it. So I do understand why it's been done. And I think, as I say, it really roots the film in this sense of like Britishness and isolation as well. But it did just really take me out of it. So I wasn't sold on it as an ending, I'm afraid.
But if you think about it, with these type of films, say 8 to 9 times out of 10, when you have your main characters running away from the infected and you know the film is about to end, would you have guessed what was actually going to happen?
Would I have guessed Jimmy Savile Ninjas? Not in 1,000 lifetimes.
Exactly. So yes, it did. It completely changed the tone of the film.
Yeah.
And the mere fact that we're spending time talking about it,
I know,
and we don't know about it. So I think, yes, I think when we see further works, then we'll be able to look at that more in context. But the fact, yes, it's a completely batshit ending. It's not something that anybody would have expected. It's, and the fact that it's Jack O'Connell again.
I know.
Oh,
he's having his hot villain summer. He really is.
Oh, certainly is. Yeah, he's right up there. So the fact that they took it in that direction rather than having something that would have been scary and foreboding for something else that was going to come. The fact that they ended it like that, you're going, okay, yeah, you've got a set of cojones on you there. You are definitely going for it, and it's a real talking point, and people will be saying, well, I've not seen anything like this before, so what's going to happen next? Is it going to be something, is it going to be more comedic? Are we going to get the Ninja Adventures film? You know, how they actually came to be, how we got the group together. And it's almost like a Scooby-Doo film at that point, if you think about it. So it's, yeah, I can understand why it took you out of the film. I think it was designed exactly to do that. It was designed to ask questions, and it was designed for people to go, what the actual fuck? What is this? This is not fitting in with the tone of anything else that's come before. But I enjoyed it. I was like, yep, bravo, well done. Can't wait to see some more. And it's such an anticipation thing as well, because you see this character for 3 minutes, maybe at the most, 2-3 minutes, and you're going, yep, I want to see more of this. I want to see what's going on here. Like, where the hell they have all come from, you know? So yes, and where did they learn their skills?
Where did that come from? So to our American, European and Antipodean listeners, good luck falling down the Jimmy Savile rabbit hole.
Don't
highly
blame
recommend
us.
the Louis Theroux documentary. So yeah, I mean, I think it sets up obviously a very interesting premise for the next film, which I believe Nia DaCosta shot at the same time as Danny Boyle was working on this one. So don't know when that film is coming out, I should say, but obviously it has been shot.
It's either December or January, I think it's coming out.
As early as that? Wow.
Yep,
okay.
It's completely finished as far as I'm aware, yeah.
Wow, okay, so they're really not leaving long then between the films, which is interesting, obviously, because there's such a huge gap between 28 weeks later and 28 years later.
6th of January next year it's coming out.
Interesting.
So that's 7 months, 6-7 months.
Yeah.
And then I think if they get the green light for the third film, which they're waiting on how successful this one is, whether they get all the money they need for it, it's going to be like a couple of years, obviously, so it's not going to be like another 6 months. But apparently it's ready to go. It's been, the script and everything is all there.
Wow.
So as soon as they get the financing, they're going to start it. And I think they've got like casting sort of in progress and everything as well. Nothing has really been announced yet until they have been told, but I suspect they probably will get it.
Yeah, I suspect they will as well. Which brings me neatly on to, of course, would you recommend this film to our dear listeners?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Without any misgivings at all, I would say watch this film. You will be entertained in a number of ways, and it's not for the squeamish, I would say, especially if you don't like birthing scenes. Please stay away from this movie, because I was glad that I wasn't eating at that point in the cinema. Popcorn would have been spat out. But yes, I would heartily recommend this film for pretty much the second half of it more than the first half. But yes, I would recommend it.
I'm actually going to say no, that I wouldn't recommend it, because I just did not connect with this film in the way that I hoped I would. I was so hyped up to go and see it, and for me it's probably on par with 28 Weeks Later in terms of I just didn't enjoy it. I think there are great elements to it. Like, I really enjoyed the way the infected have evolved, and I really thought Ralph Fiennes was brilliant in it, but it just didn't have enough to hold me, I'm afraid. And I'm increasingly concerned by the patriarchal structures that I'm noticing within these films as well, that seem to sort of have no redress to them as well. It's just accepted that that's the way the world works, so that's a bit disappointing as well. But don't get me wrong, I don't think this would stop me from going to see the next one out of pure curiosity. Like, that's not what I'm saying. It's just that this film didn't work for me, but I probably will go and see the next one regardless. So yeah, it's a difficult one, because, as I say, I had high hopes for it, and maybe just expectations are a bit too high, I guess.
Well, you shouldn't have to have high expectations in terms of female representation in films. You really shouldn't, not in this day and age. And that is quite glaring, the way that, probably because we've watched all the films in a short space of time and said, yeah, this isn't good enough. And it's been nearly 30 years in the making for all of it. So it should be a lot better than it is. But yeah, you never know. Maybe the next one will redress that. I kind of doubt it will, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. So moving on then, we are going to talk about Joseph Kosinski's F1, the movie, which is set to bring the motorsport to an even wider global audience.
Some people look at Sonny Hayes. They see a guy who lives in a van, a gambling junkie who missed his shot, the best that never was. But I see possibility. My Rook is a phenomenal talent, but he's young. You plus him, boom, I got a team.
When was the last time you won a race?
Sunday, Daytona.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant Formula One.
Oh, I'm sorry. Then same as you.
So the film is written by Erin Kruger and Kosinski, centering around a retired Formula One driver who decides to suit up once more in order to save an ailing F1 team. The filming took place over the course of an actual race calendar, with Brad Pitt and Damson Idris often lining up next to Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, who is one of the film's producers, for national anthems and podiums. But can this film ever live up to the thrill of the sport itself? So, before I get into all my questions and stuff like that, John, what were your expectations going into this film? Because I don't know how closely you've ever followed F1. Obviously, Kosinski was Top Gun Maverick. Like, what did you think you were going to experience going into this?
I kind of bought into the hype of this being Top Gun in racing cars, based on the fact of the sort of pre-publicity, the fact that you were mentioning it quite a lot, the fact that you kept seeing Brad Pitt during like qualifying rounds of F1 events, and the fact that obviously the pedigree, the whole Top Gun Maverick, it's the same director, it's Brad Pitt, it's an event film more than anything else. So yes, my expectations were quite high, and they only heightened when you actually started seeing the trailers for this film as well. And I thought, yeah, this could be something really, really special. So what about you?
I mean, I'm fit to burst. I honestly, obviously, I follow Formula One. It was absolutely mental watching like qualies and free practice and national anthems and seeing Brad Pitt and Damson Idris lined up, because I was just like, the easy way out to make an F1 film would have been to have like a fake race calendar, fake teams, fake drivers. Do you know what I mean? And just set it on a completely different like universes, where the fact that they've done it within an actual race calendar and they've involved like the team principals, some of them even have lines. There's all these driver appearances as well. I was so excited. And for me, one of the most exciting things about this film is actually Hans Zimmer's score. I haven't stopped listening to it since I saw the film. I love his actual score where it's got that sort of like ticking sound in it. And then when the sort of brass comes in, it sounds as if he's sort of lifted a little bit of the F1 theme itself. And then you've got all the sort of like cool rock and pop that sort of goes through it as well. So can we start off just by talking about that score then and how good it is and how it sort of plunges you into the world of racing pretty much from the opening few scenes? What did you think of that, of Zimmer's score, and of course the sort of classic pop and rock that he's brought into it as well?
Yeah, I thought it worked fantastically well. I've been listening to it for the last week when we've been driving about and stuff, and
it's good driving songs. Yeah.
It is really good, and you're right about the sort of propulsive nature of it, the ticking. It's reminiscent in that sort of way of Dunkirk, because he used time as a sort of motif for all that. But yes, it works really well. And you've got big numbers and sort of quieter numbers as well, sort of EDM type music for some of the races and all that. And it just, it's brilliant. It really works well. Obviously, all the needle drops as well are good, but I don't think it compares to the actual score, because the score is actually tailored for the film itself, whereas the needle drops are pre-existing tracks or whatever. So yes, and it kind of mixes that up really well. But yeah, I was very impressed by that, because it fits in so well with what you're actually seeing actually up on the screen at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like the score really complements the soundscape as well, because you've got obviously like engine roars. Formula One cars are incredibly loud, crowd noise and dialogue. Like I felt the balance between all three. You were never losing what was being said, but you were still getting this experience of being in like an arena, essentially. Did you feel the same way as well? Because I think quite often, and we've said this on this podcast, is sometimes with particular scores or soundscapes, you miss the dialogue because the sound balance isn't right. But I feel like this film absolutely gets the balance correct, which is hard to do, I guess.
He's very good at that. Hans Zimmer is very good at that, because he takes everything into consideration. He knows that music is part of it, but it's not the main part of it. It's an element. So it has to fit in with, well, especially in this film, it has to fit in with spoken dialogue over team radios, and also the actual noise on the circuit as well. So you have to have a good balance in there. You can't have one element overpowering it. It would be very easy for Hans to say, I'm Hans Zimmer, my music has to sit on top of that, but he's never been about that. It's all about the collaboration. So yeah, in that respect, works perfectly. Of course it will, it's a very good team that they brought together, Don't know if they could change wheels in a car in 3 seconds, but, still a very good team.
Yeah, so obviously the actors in this film, they're driving F2 cars with F1 fit-outs, and Joseph Kosinski and cinematographer Claudio Miranda used what's been called groundbreaking IMAX cameras mounted on real cars. Did you feel like you were in the cockpit of an F2 car?
Pretty much, yes. It's scary how accurate it seems now. Obviously, I don't know if it's accurate. I've been in not an F2 or an F3 car. It's just one of these smaller cars up at Knockhill. You can drive. Your wee cars, and it's really it's not like spring-loaded gears or anything in it. It's different, but it is a wee car like that. It's nowhere near as fast as that. But so I've experienced something, but obviously not even speeds up to like 100 miles an hour or anything. It was fairly gentle because I didn't want to crash. But the feeling that you get in these, the look that you get from the way that cameras are mounted and anything, you do feel as if you are actually in the car. I thought it was very, very well done. And I can't imagine the technicalities involved in actually mounting any sort of camera, never mind an IMAX camera, which is generally larger and heavier. So they must have some sort of micro technology that they were working away at there, because if there's anything traveling like at that sort of speed, the G-force against these cameras like on these streamlined machines would be incredible as well. So yeah, it's very, very impressive. It really is.
Yeah, no, I thought that the shots from inside the cockpit, you've got this sort of face-on helmet shots, you've got the shots from the side panelling, which the F1 broadcast do as well. Yes. Shots from the back wing and on like the side plating as well. Like, I thought it was phenomenal in terms of really immersing you in the sport. And if you do watch Formula One, you are familiar with these angles as well. So I thought it was sort of a nice compliment, I guess, to the actual broadcasting that does go on for the sport. But obviously you're looking at it and you're going, fucking hell, that's Brad Pitt driving that car or whatever it is. So I feel like it definitely added another sort of layer of authenticity to it as well. And obviously the film was shot across actual Grand Prix weekends. It covers 9 races. It starts at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix, then goes to the Yas Marina for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix at the end of the season. Did you feel the pacing of the film was quite right? Because obviously, 9 races could be very, very repetitive, even though the tracks are obviously different and the setup of the cars can be quite different and the weather can be different. But ultimately, it's still 9 races. How did you feel the pacing sort of worked across that?
They tackled it in slightly different ways for different races. Obviously, the first one was more of an introduction to Sonny actually racing for the team and everything to do with that. And what they did for subsequent ones were they had like snatches of action from the actual race itself and some from in the garage and all the team principals talking and how they built up to it, rather than just having chat, race, outcome, chat, race, outcome. So they didn't do that all. And they used the races in such a way as to build the stakes of the actual story itself, and also introduce the relationship between the drivers and the mechanics, all the behind the scenes staff and all that. So yes, they chopped and changed in order to develop the story rather than focusing on the driving. Now that would have been very easy to do because it's an F1 sanctioned movie, so more time that they're spending out on the track. And like you say, it's showing it in the same way that you would watch F1 on the television. It's the same angles, it's the same camera movements, it's the same cutting between certain elements. You're seeing like looking at it from the car backwards to somebody who's trying to overtake, or there's maneuvers and all that going on, or you're actually seeing like a wide shot from like the stands and all this sort of thing as well. So yes, I and they mixed all that up all through the 9 races, so it didn't feel like 9 races at all. It felt like bits and pieces of races, but the more important ones with relation to the story, they spent more time on it. And obviously there was going to be the big finale race as well. And you knew you were always going to get that, but the way that they built up to that was you would see bits and pieces of races, and it helped the fact that they were crashing and going out of the race and things like that. So you weren't seeing whole races. So when you actually came to the finale and it was most of a race, you would see, well, not most of the race, you'd see far more of the race in the last one. It didn't feel as if you were just repeating yourself all the time. It did feel as if there was sort of a storyline there that was building up to this, and it was building up the tensions and everything. So yeah, I thought it worked very, very well in that respect.
Yeah, I definitely feel like you've got the nice balance between the backroom and the technical stuff, as well as the character development on top of the races as well. But obviously the races themselves, you would get to see the characters' personalities as well. Like obviously Sonny basically just being a dick in pit stops, or purposefully taking cars out just because he thought it would help Joshua get into the points as well. One of the things that the film does as part of the races is it has the Sky F1 commentary team of Crofty and Brundle actually doing the commentary for these races as if Sonny Hayes and Joshua Pearce were driving in these races.
Yep.
If you are familiar with F1, I feel like this might be a little bit of overkill because I felt like they were over-explaining things. But did you feel that was an asset to the film, or did you feel it took you out of it?
No, I think it was an asset because there are a lot of people, and I include myself in this, that know a wee bit about F1. They've watched some of it, they maybe watched highlights of races and things. And what that was doing there was explaining that it's not just about the people who are at the pole, not 1 and 2. There are people battling for positions, and there's strategies and all sorts of things going on that involve cars further down the pecking order. And that is just as important sometimes in terms of overall standings and points. And like your Constructors' Championship, it's not just the one thing. Oh, check me out here. Eh?
I know, look at you using technical terms.
So there is far more at stake in terms of the race rather than just the first person crossing line. Yes, that's very important. But for the uninitiated or the people who are just sort of casual viewers, it was good to be reminded of that these things all go on. And the way that they commentate about it, it doesn't just concentrate on who's leading. It can concentrate on a battle between 5th and 6th, because that's vitally important.
Yeah.
You know, so yes, it may be for people who are like F1 aficionados like yourself, it could be a little bit of overkill. But for the majority of people, I don't think that would be the case, because it's not just going to be F1 fans that are going to go and see this film.
Oh, no, of course not. And I actually think it's quite helpful because, for example, if you've watched like Netflix Drive to Survive, and that was your sort of intro into the sport, as it was for me, you know, you spend your first season watching it going, I don't know what a double yellow flag means, or I don't know, you know, what DRS is or how that improves. So actually, if you're going into this film, there's not an expectation that you have to be up to speed with all of the terms. If you are, great. It just adds to your enjoyment of the film. But actually, if you're going into this because you like Brad Pitt, or you like Kerry Condon, or you like Javier Bardem, but you don't necessarily understand all these technicalities, then I think it's actually helpful. And again, it just adds this other layer of, oh my God, that's Crofty and Brundle commentating in a race as if it is a real race. So there is that kind of excitement from it as well. So I know that Chris definitely found it overkill, but I understand why that was there. I understand the choices that have been made to include that, because I think it's important, obviously, to make your audience feel like they understand what's going on as well. One of the things the film has come under fire for, actually, is its stunts. So Joshua Pierce's big fireball crash is very reminiscent, right down to the injuries, of Roman Grosjean's crash in Bahrain in 2020, and seemingly the archival footage of Sonny Hayes, Brad Pitt's character's crash, is actually a genuine crash that happened within F1. So what are your thoughts on that? Obviously, it's an F1 film. Crashes are very much part of it, and to not include them would have been ridiculous. But what are your thoughts on the actual footage being used and a crash that's designed to look like one that did genuinely happen?
I think with the first crash where Sonny crashes as a young driver, I read an article about the driver that actually happened to. And he was driving the same type of car. It was all with the camo livery and everything like that.
Yeah, when cigarettes sponsored him.
Yes. And Lewis Hamilton actually, as a producer, approached him and asked for permission to use that, even though they owned all the footage for it. F1 owns the footage for all of the races, obviously. He was asked if they could use that as part of the story, and obviously he agreed to it because it had actually happened. And it didn't sugarcoat the fact that the accident was bad, but it actually went into detail, and it said the accident was horrific. And if anything, the film had actually pulled back from how horrific it was, because when you see Sonny actually out on all the stuff with him, see how basically the car splits in two and he's out on the track, that happened, except the real driver was splayed all over the place. He was like a complete mess. He wasn't like crouched up in like this sort of huddled position. And I know that was bad enough because obviously it was like very, very serious injuries. But if anything, they downplayed that, because you don't need that totally gory aspect of it. You know something's that serious, and the fact that it took minutes. I mean, there was still cars driving around. For I think it was like 2 minutes or something before they actually managed to get it all stopped and actually get medical care to them and all this. It was mad, but they actually had consulted. So, like I say, even though they owned all the footage and the stories behind these, they consulted the people who was involved in them, because they don't want negative publicity for a start. and they want to make it as authentic as possible. They want these background stories because it all adds a bit of colour to the actual film itself, saying, well, these things actually happened. And it kind of emphasised that F1 is a dangerous sport. Even though it's far safer than it used to be, you don't get so many like cars going up in fireballs and things like that. You don't get as many deaths for a start. I mean, when was the last death in F1?
Probably a few years ago with an F2. There's been a couple of young boys that have died, but again, their cars are not set up the same way as F1 cars. Yes. But within F1 itself, Grosjean is the biggest sort of fireball that we've had, and that was obviously 5 years ago.
Yeah, so the fact that they're using all this, I think it works, and it's not exploitative because they're saying F1 is dangerous, and here is an example of just how fucking dangerous this can be. You can have a person sitting in a car that is on fire. Now, it's interesting because the safety aspect of it is highlighted as well, because, when Joshua comes out of the car, it's his hands that are, and that's the most exposed part, because these guys are head to toe in fire retardant gear and everything. So they've learned a lot of lessons from that, but there's still exposure points and everything. So I did think it worked, and I didn't think it was overly exploitative. It was necessary to say there are stakes here, and it's literally life and death as well. What did you have issues with it?
Yeah, I think that for me, the minute I saw Joshua's car flip and the big fireball, my first thought was, so the episode of the Drive to Survive is called Man on Fire. And I remember watching that race in real time, and the fire was enormous, and you're thinking, I'm witnessing this guy's death. Like, there's no way he's coming out of this. And of course, he did. He emerged through the flames, and he held up his hands to show that it was his hands that were burnt. And so immediately I drew comparisons to that, because it's a very similar setup. But also, I think that crash in particular gave you insight into the characters. So Sonny did tell Joshua to wait. He was like, now's not the right time to make the overtake. And Joshua, obviously, there's been a bit of ribbon back and forth between him and Sonny, and he thinks, I know better. So he does it in his time. So I think that as much as it's a big dramatic stunt, and it's incredible to look at, but it also shows you a bit of character development as well. And then we obviously get the aftermath, where we see Joshua's mum, who's obviously quite a big force in his life, basically feeling disappointed and let down by the team and by Sonny, without realising obviously that it was Joshua's call to try and do the overtake. So I think that as much as it kind of makes you go, oh, that's exactly like such and such from, this particular race, it also does lend itself well to the character development. And you mentioned it obviously that Lewis Hamilton is a producer on this film, and I just don't believe for a second that he would have, he's so passionate about like inclusion and doing the right thing, that I just don't believe for a minute that there would have been anything that hadn't been sort of ticked off, signed off, meticulously by those involved. Because I do feel like having him and obviously Bernie Collins and Ruth Buscombe as they were strategy advisors to the film, I do feel like having all of that has made the film feel very real. And as you've said, it's not just about the glamour of, like, say, a Monaco with the yachts and all that. There's the very real danger of driving around, these hairpin corners at 200 kilometers an hour. Like, yes, it's glamorous and their personalities and they're millionaires, but there is a lot of risk involved. And I felt like a film like this couldn't ever avoid that, or couldn't sugarcoat it anyway.
Oh, definitely,
you have to show the reality of it. And the film obviously it's based in reality, because there's appearances from over 20 F1 drivers, as I said, including Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, and the likes of Charles Leclerc. But we also get to see the team principals. So there's a gorgeous little setup with Kim Bodnia's character, and it's Zach Brown and Fred Vasseur. And then we have Toto Wolff, who is an executive producer, also appearing at the end of the film. I mean, I was smiling from ear to ear, seeing all these wee moments, because I was just like, that's Fred, or that's, whatever. Like, how did you feel watching this? And I wonder how they convinced these guys to do this, to be honest with you.
It was a wee bit over my head, I must admit, because I don't follow F1. So I didn't really know these characters, but I realised that they were actual people, because they didn't look like actors in a way, and they came across in a way that, like the wee interview portion where there was three of them sitting on the couch, you could tell that they were the real deal, they were the real people. And I liked it as being a nod for people who are very much into it. It didn't take away anything from the film as far as I was concerned, because I didn't understand it. It was just another layer, another level. That could quite easily have been actors doing that, just the actors maybe that you don't know particularly well. So the fact is, it wasn't, made no difference to me at all. But yes, I liked it. I've read a wee bit about some of them, how I can't remember the one I was thinking about. He always swears when he's
Gunther and Gunther Steiner, and he is in the film doing a big what the fuck from the pit lane. So
so that was a nod to the fact that he does that all the time anyway. So yes, I like that, and it means that you can go back and watch these films and get a wee bit more from them as well, because there is these sort of elements to it. But like I say, it was a bit beyond me as just sort of a casual viewer. I'm sure people would have been like going, "Oh, that's brilliant! That's really good." I'm assuming. Well, you've already said.
Yeah, I did.
It was for you, yeah.
I really laughed because Fred Vasseur is famous for giving like quite funny answers in his interviews, and so when they said to him like, "What does Ferrari think of the team?" and he just went, "We don't." And I was like, oh, that is an answer that Fred would give. Or even at the end with Toto Wolff trying to poach Joshua for Mercedes. I mean, Toto's famous for basically like having lunches and dinners with whoever's like the next big thing, and there's always rumours about who's going to Mercedes. So even though presumably he had some say over what his maybe piece of dialogue was, it was the most Toto thing you've ever seen, him trying to poach up like, you know, a new driver. So for me, like I did it, I absolutely loved it. Like I loved seeing all these little like mini performances, I suppose you would say, and also the fact that these guys aren't actors, you know, they're very serious, they're team principals, they've got a job to do, but they've obviously taken the time out to film it, a couple of lines or two. Interestingly, I did read that Christian Horner and Red Bull wanted to see a copy of the script before they would agree to be filmed, because they were worried they were going to be portrayed as the villains, and actually this film was so not about Red Bull at all. So it's like, oh, you think of yourselves obviously in a different way to like what this film is about. But I mean, besides all the realism, we obviously have some good performances in here from the actual actors who are doing the job as well. Brad Pitt is age defying at 61. I mean, literally looks a good 20 years younger. Like it's funny how we've been talking about Tom Cruise obviously doing all the Mission Impossible stuff, but here's a guy of the same age putting himself through all of this. What did you think of his performance as Sonny, in terms of a sort of like the physical performance of driving the cars and doing all the trainings, and just the character in general?
I was, initially when this was announced, I was a little concerned, basically because, well, there's two things. Obviously, is his age, for a start, like you've said, he's now 61. But also, if you think about it, and this seems a little strange, Brad Pitt has never led a film like this. He has never been the lead actor in a $300 million film.
No, that's fair. But now when you say that out loud, it doesn't sound right, because he's Brad Pitt. But actually,
and he's been in so many things. He's been in massive big films, but it's always as part of an ensemble cast, if you like. There's been other, like the Ocean's films. He was very much just below George Clooney in that sort of pecking order, that kind of thing. So he's very popular, he's very well known, but when he tends to lead a film, it's a lot lower in terms of the budget. Like, for instance, I mentioned Bullet Train. That was a much smaller film. That was all based on virtual sets, basically, on trains and things like that. So this is far bigger. This is a massive gamble. This is sort of Tom Cruise territory. This is your Mission Impossibles, your Top Gun Mavericks. It's your high-end films. Now, would Brad be able to pull that off? And I say, yeah, I think he probably did, yes. He didn't hide the fact that he was older in this.
Oh, there was loads of age jokes in this film.
Yeah, there was no pretense about him being... I think in the film he was meant to be in his 50s. I think that was the only thing. But even
which
then,
would still make him the oldest F1 driver by around 10 years if he was even in his 50s.
Yeah, they did try to explain that's part of the initial conversations about how some drivers would drive up to, longer. I think did you not say there's a couple of drivers at the moment that are in their 40s?
Yeah, Lewis Hamilton obviously is in his 40s, and Fernando Alonso is 42 or 43. So they are older, obviously.
Yes. I thought his performance was excellent, and this is the kind of performance that you're looking for in a film like this. You're looking for a star performance. You're looking for somebody who's going to be front and centre, and you can't take your eyes off him at any time. The fact that the character had a certain amount of nuance to it, I thought it was good, and he leaned into a lot of that, like I say, with the age thing and everything as well. But also the fact that he'd kind of come to terms about who he was and what he was doing. He'd been doing this for it was 30 years since his accident, basically. So he was basically a man who's come to terms with the fact that he had his shot, and now he's just, what is it? He's trying to find the silence. That's what it was all about. Yeah, so that's what he was aiming for, and he was trying to do that in a lot of different ways. But I thought it was an excellent way into the film for when you saw him in the initial sequences. It was Le Mans, wasn't it?
Daytona.
Oh, sorry, Daytona, and it introduced the character, what sort of state he's in, and
living
what
in a
sort
van.
of state he's in. Yeah, living in a van. Yeah, and he like just is like a basin of ice. He sticks his head in it to wake himself up. I thought that it was excellent. I thought he was really, really good. He was very consistent all through the film, and it wasn't just about him. There was a lot of other performances going on around him. So, the film took the time to actually have them involved, so it wasn't just the Brad Pitt show all the way through. So, I did like that.
Although I will say that the vision of him in Double Denim walking into Chris Stapleson's Bad As I Used to Be was pretty fucking iconic. That was really cool.
They only needed to do that once. They did it
like,
twice. Come on, you don't need that.
It was really a sort of like a nod, I guess, to how cheeky he was as a character, because he obviously disobeys the team orders and things like that. But I like the fact that also that we saw he was quite vulnerable. Like, he obviously had quite a specific routine before each race with his tennis balls and his playing cards, and he had to have one tucked into the suit, because a lot of drivers and a lot of sports people in general have these like wee rituals that they need to do before they can go out, and that they feel like that's what puts them at the top of their game. So I like the fact that for all that he was all mouth for a lot of the time, like, there obviously was a vulnerability there, that he felt like he needed to have all these different sort of routines in play in order for him to go out and do what he had to do. And obviously we see that, he was on the brink of death with his crash as well, which adds another layer of sort of vulnerability to him. But obviously he's playing opposite Damson Idris, whose work I'm completely unfamiliar with, I must admit, but I thought that their dynamic was excellent together, and I really enjoyed his performance. Did you feel the same way?
Yes, the story itself, and obviously that leads to how the two characters interact, is fairly standard. It's
a complete narrative by numbers. It really is. There's no getting away from that. Yeah,
it's they're bringing somebody in to mentor him, and he feels as if he doesn't need mentor because he's on the up, and he is pretty much where he should be. So all that aspect of it, seen 100,000 times before, maybe. His performance in that was very good, because he brought to the fore the fact that yes, he was where he was, but there was a whole story behind that. His upbringing, the fact that his father was missing from the age of 13 or something, so his mother was the rock in his life. She was the one that he always went back to and asked for advice, and didn't want to disappoint her, and that led to the whole, like you mentioned, the whole misunderstanding, or not misunderstanding, the fact that she didn't know the whole story when she was berating Sonny for not looking after her boy and things like that. But in that sort of circumstances, there was more than enough blame to go around. I think everybody was at fault there, so I don't think Sonny was exempt from it. But yes, the interactions between the two of them were fairly standard, but they were funny as well, and they were interesting. The fact that there was this young brash guy, and he was calling him like grandpa and all this sort of thing, and it worked very, very nicely. And the script lent into that, and all the sort of supporting characters around that lent into that as well, because they all chipped in with things either on one side or the other as well. And it was nice to see the fact that yes, he did mature and grow, but there was always a certain amount of vulnerability in there right up until the very end of the film. There was that vulnerability, and it was only like during the last race really that he did see him actually start to mature a bit. It took a lot longer than I thought it would. I thought maybe around about race 6 that they would have this. Well, initially, when they'd raced at first, I thought, around about race 6 or 7, this is when they'll start to click and they'll come together. And I certainly certain aspect it did, but it took a couple of false starts in that he was obviously out with his hands been injured, and then when he came back, they still didn't get along, and they had an altercation on the track as well.
Yeah.
So that didn't quite follow the standard, because usually there's
they've kissed and made up and they understand each other.
Exactly, yeah. Like the Rocky theme starts playing in the background, that kind of idea, you know. There's big dramatic music, and they're getting along and they're laughing and they're throwing cards at each other or whatever, you know. But yes, it took longer for that to happen, but it was a very impressive performance. It certainly was.
Yeah, I did appreciate that he was a young Black British driver, obviously kind of working class background, which mirrors obviously Lewis Hamilton's journey to the sport as well. Yes. His dad worked 3 jobs to get him in. But I really love the scene in particular where Joshua says to Sonny, like, you can't just come swanning around in here. And he's like, what's swan? And it's like, that's such a British thing to say. So I really like the way their dynamic was set up. Kerry Condon's role, actually, as the technical director, Kate McKenna, has been praised in some reviews but criticised in others. What did you make of her character? Because I feel very strongly about this.
There are 2 aspects to that character, the character of Kate. The technical side of it, when she's running it, got that nailed. She knows what she's doing. She's very impressive. And there's a reason why she's there, because basically she's an aerospace engineer. She's cleverer than most of the people who are actually in the room with her. But when she was with Brad Pitt, and it was all fluttery eyes and big smiles, and like touching his chest and all that sort of stuff, and I was going, that doesn't track with the. Yeah, it's not fair enough. Yeah, given the chance, would you spend the day with Brad Pitt? Well, but
I suppose most of them would say yes to that.
Yeah, but it was the kind of the whole wee giggling girly aspect. Yeah. It was totally different. I don't know, is that what you got? Or what?
Yeah, no, basically, because I've heard that Bernie Collins was involved, and Bernie is one of my favourite commentators on the sport. She was obviously a technical director herself, the likes of Aston Martin, and she's a very intelligent, very level-headed woman who is fascinating to listen to. But again, she's obviously had to battle to get to her place, and obviously even just to be accepted in a largely all-male commentary team. So when I heard that Bernie was involved, I thought, fantastic, we're going to get that type of character. And as you say, when she's talking about the technical aspects of the car, like the dirty air, you know, she seems to, although physically impossible, but she solved the dirty air problem. So that to me was really interesting. But as you say, she became this sort of like simpering schoolgirl type of character around Sonny Hayes, and obviously they sleep together. And I just thought it's a really disappointing representation of women in the sport, because actually women in Formula One have been fighting for a long time to be taken seriously as, you know, technical roles, office-based roles, mechanic-based roles. So it was really disappointing to see a woman of her stature who'd obviously climbed to the top of the tree. She was the technical director for the team, and she slept with one of the drivers. I was like, that's really disappointing that that's the representation of women within that sport. When if you look at likes of, you know, Ruth Buscombe, Naomi Schiff, Susie Wolff as well, all of these women who've worked really hard to reposition how women within motor racing generally are seen, and it's never once focused on their sexuality. It's focused on their technical prowess or their knowledge or whatever. So I was really disappointed. I get that there was probably like, I don't know, as we said, it's narrative by numbers. So is a love story surprising? No, especially because Brad Pitt's your star. But it just felt a wee bit of a letdown that that's the route they chose to take with her character.
Yes, because they didn't do the same with the pit crew, the women.
Yes.
In the pit crew, she obviously made a mistake, and she was.
Of course, she's the only woman on the wheel team, and she's the one that makes the mistake as well, which is annoying.
But I like the sort of the aftermath of that, because Joshua had a go at her, and then Sonny stood up for her, and then she says, "I don't need you to stand up for me."
Yeah, which was a nice wee line. I did like that.
It was. Yeah. I thought that was good, but Kate had actually said, "I don't have relationships with anybody in the team during a season because it's a distraction, it takes away." And then the first thing she does, because Brad Pitt deliberately lost a hand of cards, she thought, "Oh." So
his shirt was provocatively 3 buttons opened by that point.
Yeah. Oh,
So it was a bit disappointing. However, I will say that I thought Javier Bardem's performance was excellent. You know, I know he jokes about being in the Gucci suits and all this, and I watched a cracking interview with him where he was like, forget Brad Pitt driving at 200 kilometres an hour. Did you see me pull that Mercedes into the laundrette? Like, I did 20 miles an hour. It was like I had to clear the set because I was so worried I was going to, you know, hurt someone. But I thought his character was excellent in terms of, he obviously plays off of Kim Bodnia's team principal really nicely. He is the flashy face of the team who's doing all he can to try and save it. And obviously he has a history there because he was a driver alongside Sonny Hayes. But in terms of like supporting cast, I would say he probably stood out to me the most.
Definitely.
Would you agree, or was there other performances that you enjoyed?
No, his was the standout performance, I think, because it was front and centre very much. Like you say, he's the face of the team, and he's an actor playing a part who's playing a part. He's playing the leader and all that. So yeah, it comes across really well. And he's got great comedic timing, Javier Bardem, when he wants to and when he's called upon to do these sort of things. And I just thought it was fantastic. And he looked brilliant. I thought he looked absolutely brilliant. So well dressed at all times and everything. You just think, yeah, it's ideal. And he was in and out of it because obviously he was a supporting character. But what he did in it was excellent. And he stole the scenes, every scene that he was in.
Yeah.
You know, you could just say, yep, Harvey won that round. That's him. He's definitely. So yeah, I think that was probably the standout of the supporting performances by far. So much better than Tobias Menzies, which I didn't really like.
Like a bloody pantomime villain. That was a terrible performance. I really struggled with that because it's like, duh, you're the bad guy. You're going to double cross him at some point. And again, that in a way almost took me out of it a wee bit because I thought everybody else felt like they were properly like on top of their game, but he just seemed so poor.
Yeah, that was a bit of a negative, I must say, because in reality, I don't think you would need that because there's enough problems that they would have from the F1 authorities with the antics that they're actually trying to pull off.
I know.
You don't need a bad guy as well. Yeah.
The FIA were probably fairly angry about all those crashes that they say, because that's what I laughed at as well. So there's a couple of technical elements to this film which is quite funny. One, the team radio is broadcast all the time, so all of that shit that Sonny was pulling would have been broadcast to everyone, so he would have been disqualified, or he would have had penalty points put on his super license as well, which means he probably wouldn't have been able to compete the season. There was also a thing where he ditched qualifying but drove on the Sunday, which is against FIA rules and stuff like that. But that honestly didn't take me out of it as much as I say, the sort of Tobias Menzies sort of twirling mustache villain, because as you say, you just don't need it because there's all this other stuff going on. And also a huge shout out to Javier Bardem for wearing his Free Palestine pin on the red carpet and using his red carpet interviews to say, yep, this is a great film, but can we actually talk about the genocide that's taken place, because that man is an absolute fucking hero. If you had to compare F1, the movie, as we're calling it, to other racing films like Rush or Ford versus Ferrari, where do you think it stands in terms of cinematic achievement, but also just pure enjoyment factor?
In terms of cinematic achievement, I would say it would be above probably pretty much every other racing film of that sort of respect. In terms of story, not so much, because obviously there've been a couple of films, like Rush was a very good film in terms of the story.
Brilliant, yeah. Excellent
performances, but the racing aspect of it wasn't as spectacular as this. It was very good. And you had, like you said, Ford versus Ferrari was a different beast altogether. That was obviously big personalities there as well, but that was more of the intrigue and the politics behind putting a racing team together and making it successful. So yes, in terms of spectacle, yeah, this is far and above. And you've got to remember there were other films like Le Mans back in the day. Was that Steve McQueen, Paul Newman? I couldn't remember, but it was a very dry film because it was mostly racing, and it didn't have as much of a narrative about it. And that's the problem with most type of sport films. Is how do you wrap a story around the fact that you're watching something that is exciting, but do you want to be watching the same thing over and over again? And the way that the coverage of racing has actually evolved to make it more exciting and more interactive, and there's lots of stats and everything involved, and all the technicalities, like you've mentioned, about how things work about it. There was a lot of that in this film. The technicalities, I was really surprised about how technical this film actually was, in terms of, like, you're talking about dirty air, and the fact that, and it's something that I knew, but I didn't really think about all that much, the fact that such a minute change to a car can make a difference, and it's only a tenth of a second. You say, well, that's not very much. But then when you're working at very small margins, a tenth of a second can be everything, especially if it's over 60, 70 laps. It's such a difference. It's between, finishing 10th and finishing first a lot of the time. So that's, all this sort of stuff I thought was really good. And I liked the fact that, I don't know if this is actually true or not. Like, obviously, in the lead up to the very end of the film, they were able to put on their soft tyres. Was it? And theirs were brand new because they didn't.
Because they hadn't used them in quali. Yep.
So they were. Was that actually accurate?
Yes, you can do that. Basically, you've got a certain amount of tyres per race per weekend, but you have to, during a race, you need to use at least, I think it's 2 types of tyres. So you have to swap like a soft for a medium or a medium for a hard or whatever. So yes, they could have done that because, for example, yesterday in quali, I think it was Ferrari used up their soft. So I think they were saying like McLaren and Red Bull would have an advantage going into today because they hadn't used them in quali. So yeah, because obviously your tyres degrade really quickly. So actually, yes, that was one of the technical elements of the film that they got correct.
Yeah, so they were going on to brand new tyres rather than tyres that were part worn.
Yeah.
Excellent.
More speed.
Yes, I like that, because I like the wee sort of technicalities, the wee bits that they bring into it, and I did read that it would have been impossible for Brad Pitt to do the last race because he didn't do it. He didn't. You can't just rock up on the Sunday. No,
your double denim.
yeah. So yes, I did really enjoy that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to bring, like, a bit like the whole Drive to Survive thing. I definitely think it's going to open up the sport. And obviously Liberty Media, who do the Formula One coverage, they want that bigger audience. They want the American audience in particular, because obviously it's typically, I would say, seen as a European sport. I think that's fair, a sort of British European sport. So they want those bigger audiences. So I definitely think this will open up another sort of portion of people who maybe only like NASCAR, or they'll watch Daytona, but they've never watched Formula One, and actually maybe they would go and watch this. I do think in terms of technical achievement, it is a pretty phenomenal watch. It is a proper summer blockbuster, niggles aside with the sort of like the facts of the film or the sort of like paint by numbers story. I do really enjoy it. Obviously, narratively, it's not as strong as the likes of Rush and that sort of thing, which I will always hold up as a brilliant film just for the performances, never mind the fact that it's about Formula One. But I do think it's quite an achievement, and it's obviously very strong box office opening weekend. So like what you were saying about this is Brad Pitt's sort of biggest film in terms of like budget that he's leading. I think they're seeing the returns on this fairly quickly, which is reassuring. Cinema's not dead, etc., etc.
Yep. Well, it's what you want during the summer. You want these big films, but you want them to be more than just entertaining. And I think this kind of it does that. Yes, like we've said, the story is fairly standard, but it's more than made up for it by the in-depth nature of the film and the fact that it's bloody brilliant to look at.
Yeah, it really is. So, this was like a stupid question, would you recommend this film?
Yes, definitely. I would say don't be put off by the fact it's 2.5. It's about 2.5 hours long. It does not feel like it doesn't feel like a long film at all. It passes very, very quickly. It's for a film about cars, it is very pacey. So yes, I would definitely recommend this to everybody. And it is the kind of film that it doesn't matter your level of knowledge. You will be guided along. No one's left behind.
Yeah, I completely agree. I absolutely recommend this film. When is the Blu-ray coming out? I want it so bad. I cannot stop listening to the soundtrack as well, which, given that I'm a passenger princess, like, on the subway or walking to work, it doesn't have quite the same effect as if you're driving a fast car. But certainly I just think it's excellent to look at and to listen to and take in. And as you've said, you don't need to have ever seen a Formula One race in your life, you will be guided through this. So yes, that is the Moviescramble podcast for this week. We will be continuing on, no doubt, with summer blockbusters and our 1995 retrospective over the course of the next few weeks. But in the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us, we are on all the usual social platforms, including Blue Sky at Moviescramble. And if you want to drop us an email, it's podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. Thank you very much for everyone who has listened in over the past few weeks, and Gavin Mann, who continues to make Apocalypse Now references anytime we put out a new pod, because clearly our Rob Roy and Braveheart episode was so good. So thank you very much for listening in. But until next time, it is goodbye from me. Bye.
Bye.